Okay, welcome everybody, the 4 people that are in this room. Today we're going to talk about sequencers in L2s, the centralized, and shared sequencers, but also I'm going to explain how at Morph we're approaching the centralized sequencers. So yeah, let's get started. So my name is Abril. I'm developer relations engineer at Morph. I used to be a developer before, and now I'm doing this kind of job that it's basically 7 jobs in once: marketing, engineering, coming to hackathons, coming to workshops. So that's what I do in Morph. So let's talk about what is a sequencer. So here you will see how our diagram of Morph explains a little bit how everything is connected between our sequencer. So basically, this is like roll-ups, and this consists of several components. Well, I would say each of them is pretty different. They share key components like, for example, the sequencer, which is basically the main component to pick up all of the transactions from the L2 mempool, which the mempool is where all the transactions are going. And then they decide whether to execute or discard the transactions and share this information between other nodes. Then we have the layer 1 roll-up contract. So this is a smart contract that lives on Ethereum. And this receives the batches of the transaction data that happens on the L2 network. This receives also a proof, either fault proofs for optimistic rollups or validity proofs, CK proofs, for CK rollups to basically verify the batches. This is a very good diagram that I will give credits to Jared Watts from Polygon. This explains really well the role of the sequencer on L2s. Basically, you will see that the user submit a transaction, these read the transactions from the mempool, and they execute or discard them. Basically, without the sequencers, none of these roll-ups transactions will be handled at all. And all of these batch the transactions up together, and they send it directly to Ethereum, to the main network. Basically, without this sequencer, there will not be a rolling up, and which is like the responsible for sending all of the transaction data that happens in the L2, and it's important to send all of the data batch to the L1. In this case, we are an EVM network, so this sends to the L1, which is Ethereum. And we have different type of sequencers. Each one is pretty different. I would say they come in different shapes. Each rollup, like for example, Polygon CKVM, Linea, Base, Optimism, all of them utilize its own sequencer. So they're basically using a centralized sequencer. Centralized sequencers are the most common kind of sequencer that all of these chains are using. They're used by Optimism, Arbitrum, CK-Sync, Linea, Scroll. And this is basically a software that fetch all of the transactions from the mempool, that they check if they're valid, and then they put the valid one into a batch to send to the main network, to Ethereum. It usually is maintained by the core engineers of the rollup team. So it's basically owned by a single entity, right? Which makes it really centralized. So it operates on a centralized server and also use a single account to post all of the batches to Ethereum. This has like different benefits, but also has some limitations. For example, I will say the centralized sequencers focus only on software efficiency and basically the hardware performance. And this results in basically high performance because we just have one single entity taking care of everything, so this makes it faster. But at the same time, if a centralized sequencer fails, the rollup stops handling all of the transactions, and this can basically turn off the network, which it already happened with Linea, as it happened a few weeks ago. So the centralized sequencers basically control of the mem extraction and can potentially censor all of the transactions and basically is the opposite of what we're advocating for, which is decentralization. But as I said before, this makes it, this has the benefit of having a high performance network. Then we have the shared sequencers, such as Presso and Astria. And this basically allows multiple rollups to share a decentralized network of sequencers. This is like in the middle of a decentralized sequencer and a centralized sequencer. Basically, this is a network that sits in the middle between the L2 and the L1. And anyone can basically, in a permissionless way, utilize the rollup as a decentralized sequencer for their own network. So they're almost like a decentralized sequencer service, as a service, right? I would say the benefit of shared sequencers is that they are advocating for interoperability. So they are sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that word. But basically, they provide the value to users using rollups that basically share the sequencing layer. That's why, for example, Astria and Espresso use this type of sequencer. But you can see here in this diagram that they can be basically less trusted, but they're like basically they can be more functional or more. Each one has like, I will not say this one is better, this one is worse. Each one is different, and for different priorities of each network, it just works better for them, right? But at Morph, we're actually approaching a decentralized sequencer. So I will explain. This is the diagram of how it's pretty complicated, but I will go through it. Basically, a decentralized sequencer uses a decentralized network of nodes to perform all of the responsibilities of the sequencer. It's basically more time-consuming, less consistent, and it's more expensive to call upon a decentralized network of nodes to act as a sequencer, right? But the benefit here is that we don't have a single point of failure because we have multiple sequencers running, right? For example, in Morph, we have right now 7 sequencers in our testnet that are being run by us. But for mainnet, we are approaching to open to partners, plus 20 partners will go through a staking election process to run their own sequencers. How it will work? Basically, to join this group, these participants need to put down some kind of ETH as a kind of promise, right? And this is done through the staking contract that I mentioned before. And they will need to go through an election process to become a sequencer. We will be pretty selective at first for security reasons. But this is a way to make sure that only serious and committed participants get to do the job of being a sequencer. And once they're part of the sequencer set, their main task is to take all of the transactions that haven't been confirmed yet and put them into blocks. So this generates the blocks for the L2. And then they work together to check and agree that everything in those blocks is correct. They validate the transactions. Then we use a method called tender mint consensus for this agreement. Which is a straightforward way to basically all the sequencers to make sure that they're all seeing the same transactions in the same order. And this helps the network be more secure, basically. And after they agree on the transactions, these are officially recorded onto the main blockchain. So they send all of these transactions to the L1. And this is basically how the layer 2 blocks generation are made, basically following this consensus protocol, which is BFT. The selected sequencer extracts all of the transactions from the mempool and constructs the blocks. Basically, they build the blocks. They synchronize these blocks with other sequencers, and they go through verification and voting. And the end result of this is basically the generation of these new blocks. And this is how basically the network managed to process the transactions. We use a technique called batching. So it's something called a batch submitter. And normally each block of transactions will be sent to the main blockchain, the L1, one at a time. And basically this can be pretty slow and expensive. So to solve this, the sequencers use basically a technique that basically they put together all of the transactions into what I mentioned before, the batches. And then at certain points in time, the checkpoints, they use a BLES signature to verify that all of the transactions are valid. And so the job of the Celestia sequencer is to send all of these things to the layer 1 contract. And when basically the final state of these transactions are agreeing that the transactions are valid, and they basically, the layer 1 receive this, they check that the submitted signature matches with the transactions, and they agree with everything, and it's completely secure and valid. So you can see here how everything is connected between the sequencer to the roll-up smart contract.
I have a question. I don't know if...
Yes.
Sure. Because each sequencer is running sort of like the same set of transactions. Mm-hmm. Who gets to keep the fees in the end? Does the network share like evenly across, like, or is it
we have basically, so the first year, for example, if you're running a sequencer the first year, you will have 100% sequencer fee. Like you will basically, you will need to pay the fee, right? But then we will give it to you the first year if you're running your sequencer. So you will not pay the fee. You will not pay the fee the first year.
Right, and what about like MEV extraction? Because obviously in the sequencer I can order sort of the transactions in a way that maybe I can extract some MEV. Because a bunch of like you have, let's say 3 sequencers running the same set of transactions, like who gets to keep the MEV? Who gets to keep the,
I will say in this case, the L1. But I'm not really, so because we're approaching to open to partners, right now it's being run by us. So I'm not really sure how we're approaching that for mainnet, but that's a good question, so yeah.
Is the implementation of the different sequencers the same in terms of how they batch the transactions? Because
yes, it's the same.
It's the same, right? Then how is it gonna, if you work with partners, like what's the incentive to like compete against
a shared fee? Basically, yes. So basically, all of the sequencers are the same because we basically they need to go through the same stake and election process. So it will work in the same way. But then they will have a shared sequencer fee, and they have this benefit of the first year they will not have to pay any fee, and this is a way to incentivize partners to run their sequencer, basically. Okay, so yeah, basically all of this works together to send to the L1, and I would say, as I mentioned before, I explained the 3 types of sequencers, right? There's nothing that, centralized sequencers have their own benefits, as I say, they are more high performant, but they have one single point of failure, and the network can really turn off. And at Morph, we are really trying to be fully decentralized. So I would say for mainnet, we are expecting to have multiple partners to run their own sequencers, and by next year, because we are launching mainnet next month, we will open even more. We slowly will be opening to partners, and we will have plus 100 sequencers running. And yeah, it's just very exciting because the only L2 that is right now implementing the centralized sequencers is Metis and us. So we're trying to make the difference into that. And as you know, Morph is a VML2 that approaches this, but also we are using optimistic CKVM to become a fully CK rollup. So our main priority is to be as cheap as possible and as fast as possible, at the same time approaching fully decentralization. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this workshop, and yeah, thank you.
What's the speed difference between decentralized and centralized sequencer right now?
I explained before, but I can explain to you again.
Is there like a specific like time difference or like multiple of like?
No, it's being, the centralized sequencer is being basically run by the core engineering team of the rollup, and they are just in care of taking all of the transactions to put together into
Yeah,
the
but
right.
there's like times that they start like batching all the transactions to when they post, right? So for the decentralized implementation, like what's the difference? Because you say it's slower, right? But like by how much?
You mean like latency?
Yeah, what's the latency difference?
Okay, so I mean, it depends on the network. I'm not sure what's the latency or the TPS of, I don't know, Polygon. I think they have like 7 TPS. I'm not sure. Right now, our TPS is 20. But yeah, it depends on the network, I'll say. And also, the centralized sequencers it's just multiple sequencers. So if, let's say, if one fails, we have other ones to support that, right? And so, yeah.
But also, like that amount of like latency makes a very big difference in terms of arbitrage.
Yes, exactly. So I would say that's why I was saying that it's more time consuming, the centralized sequencer, and it's definitely not the best for high performance. But there's one Ethereum upgrade that I don't remember the number right now, the EAP, that is gonna come in January, that it's gonna fix a lot of these things that the centralized sequencers are approaching right now, and that's why for us we are expecting to open really slowly to partners to run their own sequencers, and right now our core engineering team is running all of these 7 sequencers.
And then obviously, you know, there's very few rollups that are either, like they're all running pretty much their own sequences. Like Optimism is the only one that's sort of starting to decentralize. Like, would you say so that like Arbitrum, all these big L2s are their is like your target audience, I guess, or your clients, would say, and then also like, can you run multiple different L2s with your shared sequencer network?
Oh, so you mean if one partner can run multiple sequencers?
Yes, and also like, you know, you're running the sequences for Optimism, from Arbitrum, from all the different L2s? Like
Yes. Yes, so it's actually, for example, only one, let's say you're a partner, only you can only run one sequencer. So, but this is because this is the way that we're approaching it right now. It will change over time depending on how we're approaching the CK rollup as well.
Right. So if I'm a partner and I want to run different sequencers for you guys, like I'll have one sequencer that's sort of like running for Arbitrum, one sequencer for Optimism, one sequencer for...
Yeah, because it's different methods, right, to approach that, because in our case, you will need to go through all of this, like, all of this process that is basically the staking contract. And it depends on each network, right? But in our network, you can run one depending on if you get selected to do the job or not.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Would running different, so you said that the implementation for all the sequences were the same, right? But then let's say, for example, if you run all the same sequences on the L2s right now, they will definitely have like different levels of performance, I would assume.
Yes. I would say it depends on how, you know, how they approach being maybe an optimistic rollup or a CK rollup. Yeah.
So will you guys like expand into building different sequences for different layer 2s, or?
That's a tricky question. I don't know, because that's just depends on many things. That depends on many things, yeah.
Pretty cool.
I have a question, maybe it's a little bit of a weird question, but earlier you talked about how the most trusted and highest efficiency was centralized sequencers. But why are they the most trusted? I just don't really understand that, to be honest.
So it's not like they're the most trusted. It's just when you're running our own sequencer, it's just kind of, okay, this single entity is taking care of all of the transactions, you know? It requires more time to run different sequencers. So if you just have one, only that one will take care of all of the transactions and like do all of this process basically. That's why, but I don't know if I will call it the most trust, but it's what L2s are implementing right now, because approaching the centralized sequencers is not easy. It's pretty complicated.
It's also like it has more trust assumptions as well, not just like
exactly.
Because
trust in a single entity.
if you only have one sequencer, like they can say, dude, I don't like that Luke is sending me transactions, I'm just gonna censor it. I don't want none of these meme codes that you're trading.
Exactly.
And so like you're basically trusting Arbitrum to include you in the mempool, or at least like considering you. And then when you have a decentralized sequencer, you can sort of, I mean, they're sort of competing, right? And then if they're not going to censor you. At least one of them might not censor you, right?
Exactly.
I hope they do, but
exactly. So I would say each one has different benefits. You can't achieve everything. You can't be the most fastest network, the most decentralized at once, because. But we're approaching to be that way. But that's how we're approaching it right now. I would say because we kind of sell ourselves like, oh, we are a decentralized sequencer. No, we are running our sequencers, but we have 7 right now, and by mainnet next month we will have 9 or 10. But that makes it basically. We have the advantage of not failing like linear. Right.
I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the whole presentation, man.
Yeah, I missed this.
One more time.
Time for another round. Time for another round.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yeah.